When I was 15, I knew I wasn't the favorite, but I didn't think my own father would one day look me in the eyes and say, "Pack your things, Mason. You don't belong here anymore." I'm 30 now, and yeah, that moment still plays on a loop in my head more often than I care to admit. Let me back up a bit. I'm Mason, and I'm the second son in a family that worshipped the first. My older brother, Zach, is 2 years older than me. Tall, charming, always knew the right thing to say. He could crash my bike, lie about it to my face, and somehow still get praised for telling the truth eventually. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one. I'd keep my head down, try to be helpful, clean up messes I didn't make, and still get asked why I couldn't be more like Zach. We grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and our last name meant something because of the business our family built from the ground up. My grandfather started it, Taylor and Sons Auto, a repair and restoration shop that became kind of legendary around here. Classic Mustangs, 60s Impalas, old Harley builds. They passed through our garage like family heirlooms. And yeah, there was pride in that. My dad, Richard Taylor, took it over when Grandpa retired. He ran it like a general, strict, efficient, no nonsense. But beneath the surface, he was a hard man to please. Especially with me. Zach could joke around in the middle of a customer call and get a pat on the back. I'd spend 3 extra hours organizing the tool bay and get told, "Don't waste time on stuff no one sees." By the time I hit my early 20s, it was clear that Zach would inherit the business. And honestly, I was okay with that. I never wanted to be the boss. I liked being behind the scenes, tuning engines, finding parts no one else could track down. I didn't need the spotlight. I just wanted to be part of it. Part of the legacy. Part of something my grandfather built with his bare hands. Something we used to talk about over greasy burgers when I was 10 and thought tightening bolts was the coolest job in the world. But slowly, things started to change. It began with the small things. Dad would ask Zach for input during team meetings and completely ignore mine, even if I was the one who solved the issue the day before. I'd suggest upgrading our inventory system. Zach would laugh it off, and Dad would say, "You hear that, Zach? Mason wants to fix what ain't broke." The jokes stung more than they should have. I stopped speaking up. Then came the money issues. I wasn't paid as much as Zach. When I asked about it, Dad said it was because Zach was being groomed for leadership. I wasn't. I was just lucky to be there. That one hurt. I let it slide. Told myself maybe they had a plan for me too. But the real punch to the gut came the year I turned 28. I was living in the apartment above the garage. It wasn't glamorous, but it was free, and I was saving up to buy my own place. Every morning, I'd roll out of bed, grab coffee, and be in the pit before the guys even clocked in. I ran diagnostics, ordered specialty parts, dealt with suppliers from out of state, stuff Zach never touched. And still, I was invisible. Until one evening, Dad called a family meeting, which was weird. We never did family meetings. Mom made lasagna. Zach was already grinning like he knew something, and I just had this tight feeling in my gut the whole time. Something was off. We sat around the kitchen table, and Dad cleared his throat like he was announcing a will reading. "I've made a decision," he said. "It's time to start transferring ownership." I remember the way Mom kept her eyes down, like she couldn't look at me. "I've officially signed over the business to Zach," Dad continued. "Effective next month." I blinked. Once. Twice. Tried to process it. Then he said it, just casually, like it was no big deal. "And Mason, you'll need to vacate the apartment by the end of the month. Zach needs the space." I just stared at him. At all of them. Waiting for someone to say it was a joke. For Mom to step in. For Zach to say, "Come on, Dad, that's too much." But no one did. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't even ask why. I just nodded, stood up, and walked out. That was 6 months ago. I packed my things that night, drove away before sunrise, and didn't look back. I found a cheap one-bedroom in the next town over, took a job at a competitor's garage, and started fresh. No one knew my last name there. No one cared who my father was or what my brother inherited. They just saw what I could do. I kept my head down and worked. And then, 3 days ago, my phone lit up. It was my dad, calling. First time since that night. I stared at the screen, watched it ring, saw the voicemail icon pop up. Later, I listened. His voice was hoarse, almost broken. "Mason, please. Something's happened. I need to talk to you. It's about Zach." I didn't call back. Not yet. Because something in his voice told me everything had finally started to unravel. and I wanted to hear every crack as it fell apart. When I didn't call him back, I expected my dad to get angry. That's what he always did when he didn't get his way. Growing up, disappointment wasn't some gentle conversation about how I could do better. It was the cold shoulder, snide remarks, sometimes even public shaming in front of Zach. But this time, he didn't lash out. He called again the next day, left another voicemail. This time, he didn't bother hiding the desperation in his voice. Mason, please. I don't know who else to turn to. Just call me back. I made a mistake. I played that one twice. Funny how it takes a mistake to realize who you pushed away. But I wasn't ready to give him anything yet. Not a call, not a visit, not even a text. I needed to sit with it. To make sure I wasn't walking back into another storm pretending to be a family dinner. Because here's the truth. The 6 months before that voicemail weren't just healing. They were sobering. I started seeing things I had ignored for too long. Like the time I fixed the shop's hydraulic lift on a Sunday morning, alone, because Zach forgot to schedule the maintenance. It saved us thousands in repairs. Dad didn't say thanks. Instead, he asked why I hadn't also swept the floor while I was at it. Or the Christmas before that, when Zach got a Rolex, and I got a $25 gas card and a handshake. Not that I needed the money or the watch, but you notice the imbalance. You remember it, especially when your name isn't even written on the card. But none of that compared to what happened the week after my 29th birthday. I had just gotten back from visiting an out-of-town supplier. Drove 5 hours straight to pick up a rare 69 GTO part we needed for a big-ticket client. Zach was supposed to handle it, but he'd gone off to Tahoe with his girlfriend for the weekend and left me with a scribbled list and zero context. When I dropped the part off at the shop Monday morning, I walked in and found Zach holding cord in the office, feet on the desk, sipping his overpriced cold brew like he ran the world. Dad was sitting next to him, laughing at some story I had probably lived through, and he was now retelling like it was his idea. When they saw me, Zach gave a lazy wave. Hey man, you get the part. I held it up, still in the box. Dad clapped once. That's my boy, always reliable. I almost smiled. Almost. Until he added, it's good to have someone like you supporting Zach's leadership. Not everyone's meant to lead, and that's okay. It was like being kicked in the chest. Supporting Zach's leadership. As if I hadn't just driven 10 hours round trip because Zach bailed. As if I hadn't spent every weekend for the past year picking up the slack while he played CEO on Instagram. I went back to the apartment above the garage and started packing that night. Dad called it bad timing. Said I was overreacting. Zach told me I needed a reality check because Dad's just trying to do what's best for the company. So I left. No fight. No tears. I didn't even slam the door. I just quietly walked away from the family that never saw me unless they needed something. That was my breaking point. Or so I thought. Fast forward 6 months to the voicemail. The one where Dad sounded like he'd swallowed broken glass. I still hadn't called him back. But curiosity started gnawing at me. Not concern, just curiosity. Because if Dad was calling me for help, something must have gone seriously sideways. So I did something I hadn't done in months. I drove back into town. Didn't go to the shop. Just parked across the street from the old diner where mechanics used to grab lunch. It was still there, still had the same cracked sign and the best chili dogs you'd ever eat at 1 a.m. I sat in my car and watched. Around noon, I saw one of the old guys, Pete, walk out with a to-go bag. Pete had been working at Taylor & Sons since before I could drive. Solid guy. Liked to call me Little Wrench when I was a kid. I rolled down my window. He spotted me and blinked like he wasn't sure if I was real. Then he smiled. Mason, thought you vanished. Hey, Pete. Just passing through. He came over to the car, leaned down. You heard then? I frowned. Heard what? He let out a low whistle. Man, your brother's made a mess. My stomach dropped. What kind of mess? Pete looked around, like someone might overhear. You didn't hear it from me, okay? But Zach's been bleeding the business dry. Fancy parties, personal trips charged to the shop, consulting fees for people who don't exist. Couple vendors haven't been paid in months. Customers are pulling their cars. Place is hanging on by a thread. I sat back in my seat. And there it was. The beginning of the unraveling. I thanked Pete and drove off. Didn't go to see my dad. Not yet. But the image stuck with me. The garage, once buzzing with machines and cigarette smoke and country rock, now quiet. Empty bays. Customers gone. The legacy fading. And for once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt something else. Something closer to clarity. That night, I listened to the third voicemail, the one where my dad finally admitted the truth. Mason, I should have listened to you. I should have seen it. Zach's in trouble. We're all in trouble. The shop, it's not what it used to be. I need your help. I don't know what else to do. He sounded smaller. Not like the man who once barked at me for using the wrong socket size. He sounded tired, worn down, but he wasn't the only one who had changed. Because while the shop was falling apart, I'd been building something new. The garage I joined after leaving? They saw what I could do. Promoted me in 3 months. I wasn't running things, but I was making decisions, earning respect, and for the first time in my life, feeling like I belonged. And secretly, I'd started something on the side. A YouTube channel, Wrench and Rust. Just me, working on restoration projects, showing people how to bring old cars back to life. The first few videos barely got 10 views. But then one went semi-viral. A 72 Challenger rebuild with time-lapse and narration. I hit 100K subscribers within 3 months. Brands started reaching out. Sponsors. Partnerships. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't invisible either, which made what happened next so much worse. Because just as I started to feel like I'd moved on, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a framed photo of me and my grandfather. I was 10, holding a wrench twice the size of my arm. He had his hand on my shoulder. We were standing in front of the original Taylor and Sons sign. Taped to the back was a note. 5 words. He always believed in you. No signature. No explanation. But I knew who it was from. Only one person had access to that photo. Only one person would use it to tug at a memory I hadn't touched in years. My mom. I hadn't heard from her since I left either. She'd always been complicit. Silent. The kind of parent who'd set the table while the argument raged. But she never said a bad word about me. And she loved Grandpa. So that note hit me harder than any voicemail ever could. Because it made me remember what the garage used to be. Not what it became under Dad and Zach, but what it was when Grandpa ran it. It wasn't about money, or image, or favoritism. It was about fixing things, restoring what was broken. And now, maybe that's what I was being asked to do. Not for Dad, not for Zach, but for the legacy. Still, I wasn't about to run back with open arms. So I made a call. Not to Dad, to someone else. Someone who'd been quietly watching things crumble from the inside. And what she told me, that was the real betrayal. The kind that takes everything you thought you knew about your family and burns it to the ground. The person I called wasn't an old friend or a mechanic or anyone from the business world. It was Melissa. She was the shop's accountant for over a decade and probably the only person who ever treated me with basic respect during the mess that was my final year at Taylor & Sons. Melissa wasn't flashy, didn't talk much, but she saw everything. She kept her head down, did the books, and stayed out of the family politics, until now. When I reached out, I didn't even expect her to answer. But she picked up on the second ring. Mason. Her voice was sharp with surprise, maybe even suspicion. Hey, I said, pacing in my apartment, phone to my ear. Sorry for calling out of nowhere. I heard things might be rough back at the shop. There was a pause. Then, with a bitter little laugh, she said, rough? That's one way to put it. We ended up talking for nearly an hour. She filled in the blanks. After I left, Zach went full Golden Boy Meet CEO. He redesigned the logo, tried to rebrand the entire business as Taylor Performance, wanted to attract a younger, higher-paying demographic, even though most of our loyal customers were old-school restoration junkies who didn't care about shiny marketing. He fired 2 of the original techs, hired a bunch of influencers to do garage lifestyle shoots on site, pushed a fake sponsorship deal with a tire company that turned out to be a cousin of his girlfriend playing dress-up in Photoshop. Melissa warned my dad. Repeatedly. He didn't listen. Or maybe he didn't want to admit that the golden boy had turned into a con man in slow motion. But the worst part? The money's gone, Mason, Melissa said quietly. I mean really gone. I've been digging through the books. He drained the main account. Took out a second mortgage on the property. There are liens from unpaid suppliers. If the IRS takes a closer look, they're going to see fraud. I sat down hard. My kitchen chair creaked under me. How the hell did this happen in 6 months? Because you weren't there to stop it. That hit harder than I wanted to admit. She didn't say it like blame, more like fact. Melissa went on. You know what else? He's trying to pin it on you. He told your dad some of the debts were from your last orders, your supplier contacts, leftover unpaid invoices from your era. My mouth actually dropped open. What? He's covering himself. Gaslighting your dad. Making it sound like you were the problem all along. And that's when something shifted inside me. Not anger, at least not yet. It was something deeper. A sense of finality. Like a glass finally shattering after holding a hairline crack for too long. I had walked away from the family business to keep my dignity. But now I realized, Zach hadn't just let it burn. He was rewriting the fire. That's what betrayal really is. It's not the theft. It's not the insult. It's the lie they tell about you after you're gone. The next 2 weeks were a blur. I couldn't sleep. Couldn't focus. Not out of regret, but because part of me still cared. Not about Zach. Not even about my dad, really. But about what the shop used to be. About what I used to be when I still believed I belonged there. I tried to bury myself in my work. The new garage was busier than ever, and I was managing a team now. 5 guys, 2 lifts, and a 6-month wait list for our custom engine builds. I was in charge of hiring, training, vendor relationships. I'd even started mentoring a kid straight out of trade school who reminded me of myself at 19, quiet, observant, always asking the right questions. And wrench and rust. That little YouTube side project? It exploded. A sponsor reached out. A tool company that saw my rebuild of a 1967 Camaro RS. They offered free gear in exchange for a 2-minute shout-out. Nothing crazy, but it was a start. Then the views snowballed. One video hit 1.2 million. I started getting emails from magazines, car shows, even a documentary team asking if I'd be willing to talk about modern garage culture. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been invisible for years at a shop with my own last name on the building, and now strangers on the internet wanted to know my story. And still, I didn't tell them. I kept it quiet. Because this new life, I was building it for me. Not for recognition. Not for revenge. Just to prove to myself that I wasn't broken. That I never was. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Thursday, thick envelope, real fancy paper. My name on the front in stiff black ink. Inside was a notice, legal, formal, cold. Zach was suing me. Allegedly, I had sabotaged company systems prior to departure, leading to lost revenue and client trust. He wanted damages. Real ones. 6 figures. I couldn't breathe. Not because I believed he'd win, but because I couldn't believe he had the audacity. This wasn't just a smear campaign now. It was war. I called Melissa again. She sounded stunned, but not surprised. He must be desperate, she said. He knows he's circling the drain, and he's trying to drag someone else down with him. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I could have fought it publicly. Could have called every supplier I'd ever worked with. Could have leaked the books. Could have blasted receipts across every platform I had. But something held me back. And that something was my grandfather. Because I kept thinking about that photo. About the way he used to talk about integrity. He had this saying, "You don't win by burning the garage. You win by building a better engine." And for the first time in a long time, I finally understood what he meant. Let them burn it. Let them lie. I didn't need to fight fire with fire. I just needed to build something so loud, so undeniable, so true, that the smoke from their collapse couldn't hide it anymore. So I got to work. I expanded the channel. Launched a Patreon. Exclusive videos, early access, live Q&As. Bought new filming gear. Partnered with a small custom parts brand that let me design my own limited edition tool roll. And then, without announcing it to anyone, I rented a space. Small but mine. A dusty warehouse with good bones and bad lighting. I called in a few favors. Rewired the place. Built out 2 bays. Painted the walls myself. Bought the same tool cabinets my grandfather used. Found a rusted-out set on Craigslist and restored them by hand. Every night, I'd work late, alone, headphones in, smell of oil and possibility thick in the air. The world outside could collapse. But in that space, I was becoming again, and I started planning something bigger. Not revenge. Not yet. But a project. A rebuild. Not of a car. Of a legacy. One that would carry the right name this time. My name. And just when I thought I had everything under control, when I finally started to feel like maybe the past couldn't hurt me anymore, I got a message. Not a call. Not a letter. A text. From my mother. Just 2 words. He knows. And in that moment, every nerve in my body lit up. Because I didn't know if she meant Zach. Or Dad. But either way, someone was coming. And this time, I wouldn't be leaving. The message from my mother hit me like a cold gust through an open window. He knows. I must have read it a dozen times, standing there in the middle of my new shop with grease on my palms and my playlist looping some dusty Lynyrd Skynyrd track. My mind raced. Who was he? Zach? My father? What did he know? About the channel? About Melissa? About the second garage? I stared at the screen for another minute before typing a response. Knows what? No reply. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I called. No answer. Then the 3 dots popped up, typing, and vanished. Then again, and gone. I just stood there, heart thudding in my ears like it used to when I was a kid and Dad called me downstairs using that tone. That we need to talk tone. Only this time, I wasn't a kid anymore. That night, I barely slept. Every worst-case scenario played out in my head. Maybe Zach had discovered Melissa talked to me and threatened her job. Maybe Dad had dug into the channel and figured out I'd been profiting off what he still thought was his legacy. Maybe they were planning to sue me again, but louder this time, dragging my name through the mud in front of actual media outlets now that I had some kind of following. But then the more dangerous thought crept in. Maybe he wanted something. Something only I could give. The next morning, I drove out to the old neighborhood. Not to the shop, but the outskirts. A place where self-service dropped and nobody ever checked their mailbox. There's a storage unit there I've kept for years. Originally just for extra tools and some of Grandpa's old stuff after he passed. But lately, I'd started storing more strategic things. Boxes of documents, printouts, bank records, even a few video backups I'd quietly made after talking to Melissa. Because part of me always knew this wasn't over. Inside that metal-walled box of dust and nostalgia, I found what I needed, my grandfather's old ledger. Not digital, not online, just paper, pencil, smudged fingerprints, and scribbled dates. It was the original record-keeping book from the first 2 decades of Taylor & Sons, back when he still worked 7 days a week and used nicknames for clients in the margins. It reminded me of who the business was supposed to serve, of what we'd lost when it became about image over integrity. And it reminded me of who I used to be. Not angry, not bitter, just capable. That was the day I started planning. Not just a comeback, a reckoning. But it had to be clean. No public shaming. No YouTube drama. No angry confrontations in front of cameras. That's not who I was. And frankly, Zach would love that. He'd twist it into a pity campaign. Play the victim. So I needed to be smart. Quiet. Precise. I called Melissa again. This time, I had questions. And this time, she had answers. First, I asked about ownership. Legally, she said, your father still owns the land the garage sits on. Zach owns the business name, the branding, the inventory, but not the property. I sat with that for a second. So he's a tenant? Exactly. A tenant who's several months behind on rent. That opened a door. Then I asked about suppliers. Turns out, half the people Zach owed money to were the same folks I'd worked with directly back in the day. Guys who still respected me. Some of them hadn't seen a payment since I left. A few were threatening lawsuits of their own. And then I asked about employees. Apparently, Zach had churned through 3 managers in 6 months. 2 of them had reached out to Melissa privately, asking if she knew whether I was working elsewhere and if I was hiring. I took a long breath. The cracks were everywhere, and I didn't have to create them. I just had to be there when they broke open. Over the next few weeks, I started reaching out. Quietly, casually. Never through the same platform twice. I called Sam, the welder I used to work with who left 2 months after me. He'd moved downstate to work for a franchise shop, but he hated it. I met up with Tina, the receptionist who ran circles around the whole crew and used to slip me extra printouts when Zach accidentally deleted emails. She'd been fired over some made-up policy violation. She hugged me like I was family when she saw me. And I visited one of our oldest clients, Mr. Hawkins, the classic Ford collector who used to drop off battered beauties for us to bring back from the dead. He was in his late 70s now, still sharp, still driving the Thunderbird we restored together 5 years ago. I don't go there no more, he told me, sipping coffee on his porch. They lost my trust. Lost the paper trail on my Fairlane. Claimed they never quoted me. I didn't say anything. Just listened. Whole place feels different now, he said. Like it's got no soul. You ever open up your own place, Mason, you let me know. I'll bring every last car I got. That sealed it. I sat in my office that weekend, lights dim, screens glowing. I looked at the plans I'd sketched on a whiteboard the night I signed the lease to my own garage. Back then, I'd written a single word at the top, legacy. Now I circled it. Then I made some calls. I wasn't just building a repair shop anymore. I was launching a restoration collective, a space for classic builds, custom engine work, live-stream projects, and walk-in repairs, all under one roof. But it wasn't about the money or the flash. It was about building what my grandfather dreamed of. And it was about timing, because I knew something Zach didn't. In 2 weeks, the town would host the annual Founders Auto Fair, a car expo, swap meet, and networking event rolled into one. It was the biggest local event of the year. Every vendor, enthusiast, and vintage nut would be there. And Taylor & Sons had been blacklisted. Apparently, after last year's disaster, a no-show booth and several angry customers demanding refunds, the organizers had had enough. But me? I applied under my new brand, Wrench and Rust Restorations. And I didn't just get in. They gave me center booth placement. I invested nearly every spare dollar I had. I bought signage, printed business cards, built a mobile engine rig so I could do live rebuild demos, partnered with a coffee truck for cross-promotion, even got a drone team to shoot footage for a promo trailer. Melissa agreed to help with logistics, and Tina offered to run the booth with me. It was all lining up, but I wasn't done yet, because the final piece was the property. I drove out to see the landlord of the Taylor & Sons building, a quiet guy named Mr. Costa who'd inherited the property from his father. We'd spoken a few times over the years, mostly about rent checks and minor repairs. I brought him coffee, sat down, and asked a simple question. What would it take to buy the lot? He looked at me for a long moment. You serious? Very. He leaned back. Zach's still there. Not for long. Costa drummed his fingers on the table. I've been waiting for someone to take this place seriously. I got other properties now. If you're offering a clean buyout, I'm listening. And just like that, it became possible. I went home that night and ran the numbers. It would be tight. I'd have to cash out some of my savings. Maybe delay expansion. Maybe take on a small investor. But the idea of owning the land where my grandfather once taught me to change oil for the first time, of reclaiming what was stolen, of building something better right on top of the ashes, that was worth everything. And the best part? They didn't see it coming. Zach was too busy pretending to be a mogul on social media, still posting filtered photos with captions like CEO mode activated and hustle never sleeps. And my father? He hadn't called again. Not since that final voicemail. But I had a feeling he would. Soon. Because when the expo arrived, when the booths went up and the crowds came pouring in, there'd be one name everyone remembered. Not Taylor & Sons, but the one who never needed the name in the first place. And when that moment came, I wouldn't need revenge. I'd have something better. A stage, a story, and the truth on my side. The morning of the Founders Auto Fair felt like a slow heartbeat. Not racing, not frantic, just steady. I arrived before dawn. The sun hadn't cleared the rooftops yet, and the fairgrounds were still quiet. Vendors setting up tents, hauling in chrome-polished beauties and crate engines like relics. The scent of oil and dust hung in the cool air, and for a moment, it felt like I was 10 again, holding Grandpa's hand, marveling at every Mustang and Chevelle like it was a spaceship. Only now I wasn't a wide-eyed kid in a hoodie. Now I was the main event. Our booth stood right in the center row, bigger than anything I'd ever run. I had banners printed with the Wrench and Rust Restorations logo, a sleek bronze and black design Melissa helped refine. The mobile engine rig was front and center, ready for a live teardown demonstration. Behind it, we had a screen playing time-lapse footage of my recent Camaro rebuild, cut together with subtle branding and a story-driven voiceover. And then the real kicker, a side table lined with framed photos of Grandpa, the old shop, and even one of me and Zach when we were kids, before the legacy split us. Because this wasn't about erasing the past. It was about showing I remembered everything. Tina arrived at 7:30 sharp with her clipboard and event passes. Melissa showed up 10 minutes later with coffee and a professional smile that hid how deeply personal this was for her too. I brought in the rest of the crew, Sam, 2 new hires, and the trade school kid I'd been mentoring. We all wore matching shirts. Simple, clean, no names on the back, just one phrase. Built, not given. By 9 a.m., the crowd poured in. And by 9:07, someone stopped by our booth and said the words I'd waited months to hear. Hey, aren't you the guy from YouTube? It was chaos, in the best way. By noon, we had a constant crowd. People snapping photos, asking about restoration pricing, complimenting the rebuilds and the videos and the brand. I gave interviews to 2 local reporters and one guy with a podcast mic who claimed he had 50,000 subscribers. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I didn't care. I was smiling. And then, just before 2 p.m., I saw them. Zach and my father, standing 50 feet away. Zach was wearing a tailored black button-down, sunglasses perched on his head like he was starring in a cologne commercial. My father was slower, older-looking than I remembered, stooped, less fire in his walk, like something in him had finally given out. They weren't there to admire the cars. They were there to see me. We locked eyes, and I didn't flinch. My dad said something to Zach. Zach shook his head and started toward the booth. My crew froze. Tina looked at me like, should we do something? I just gave a small nod and stepped forward to meet him. Mason, Zach said, flashing the fake casual smile I knew too well. Didn't expect to see you here. Funny, I said, voice calm. I was thinking the same. He looked around the booth, took in the banner, the crowd, the line of customers watching the live demo. Nice setup, he said, a little too tightly. Not bad for a backup plan. I smiled. This was the plan. He squinted. You trying to compete with the family business now? Is that what this is? I didn't answer right away. Just let that hang in the air. Then I leaned in a little and said quietly, there's no competition, Zach. Not when one side's already bankrupt. His jaw twitched. Where'd you hear that? I have ears. And friends. You know, people you didn't alienate. He glanced around again, trying to keep his voice even. You know this is low, right? Parading this around like a circus act. Grandstanding. I'm not grandstanding, I said. I'm building. The difference is, I didn't have to tear down a legacy to do it. His face darkened. You think Dad's gonna let this slide? I turned slightly and looked toward our demo engine. I think he doesn't have a choice. And right on cue, like some script written by fate, my dad finally stepped forward. Mason. His voice was low, rough. I turned to face him. We stood there in the middle of the fair. 2 men who shared a name and blood and not much else. For a second, he just looked at me. Really looked at me. Not with disappointment. Not with that tired irritation he wore for years. But like he didn't recognize me at all. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, you wanted to talk. Now's your chance. He hesitated, then nodded. Can we talk in private? I gestured toward the back of the booth, behind the curtain. Tina gave me a discreet thumbs up, keeping the crowd entertained. We stepped out of sight. He ran a hand down his face. I made mistakes, he said. A lot of them. I stayed quiet. I thought I was doing what was best for the business. Preparing Zach. Giving him the tools. I finally spoke. You didn't give him tools. You gave him a crown and no map. And when he got lost, he burned the kingdom. He winced. He told me you left because you didn't want to work under him. I left, I said slowly, because you told me to pack my things. Because you made it clear I was never going to be anything more than a shadow in his spotlight. His mouth tightened. I regret that. Regret isn't a solution. We stood in silence again. Then he said, quietly, he's in over his head. The shop's nearly gone. I can't fix it. I was hoping maybe you could step in. Help right the ship. I blinked, then laughed, just once. You want me to save it? It's your legacy too, he said. Your grandfather built it for both of you. No, I said. Grandpa built it to last. You handed it to a guy who treated it like a toy. And now it's broken. He swallowed. I'm asking for your help. And I'm saying no. His eyes flinched at that. But I wasn't done. I made my own shop. My own team. I don't need to fix what you destroyed. Then I pulled a small envelope from my jacket pocket and handed it to him. What's this? An offer. He opened it. Read the first line. His eyes widened. You want to buy the building? I already made a deal with Costa, I said. You're months behind on rent. He's done with you. He's willing to sell. All I need is a signature from him, and your voluntary vacate. His hands trembled slightly as he looked up. You're serious. As a heart attack. He looked like he might argue, then stopped. What happens to Zach? I shrugged. He'll land somewhere. Guys like him always do. Maybe he can run a YouTube channel about how to fake success in 6 months or less. Dad exhaled. You're not even angry. No, I said. I was. But anger fades when you realize you've already won. He nodded slowly. So this is revenge. No, I said. This is freedom. 2 weeks later, the paperwork was finalized. Costa sold me the building for less than it was worth, mostly because he hated dealing with unpaid tenants. Zach's LLC quietly folded. The Taylor Performance Instagram vanished. The sign on the front of the building came down, and a new one went up. Same location, same garage doors, but a new name. Wrench and Rust, Legacy Division. We kept the old photos on the wall, even one of Dad and Grandpa, back when they built their first Mustang together. Because I wasn't erasing history, I was honoring the parts that mattered. Word got around fast. Mr. Hawkins brought his Fairlane in the same week. The trade school sent me 2 apprentices. We launched a new series called Legacy Restorations and booked 6 months' worth of builds in a month. As for Zach, last I heard, he was trying to sell a course on garage branding and growth. No one's biting. He texted me once. Congrats. You win. I never responded. And my father? He came by once. Stood outside. Watched me work. Didn't say anything. Just nodded. Then walked away. It was enough. Because in the end, I didn't need his words. I had something better. I had peace. And I had a shop full of engines humming in harmony, grease under my nails, and a name on the sign that finally meant something again. Not because someone gave it to me, but because I built it. And this time, it was mine.